afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today. It is my pleasure as the Chief of the Geography and Map Division to welcome you to this presentation, this 2024 Philip Lee Phillips presentation. Welcome everyone here and online. The Geography and Map Division is one of the oldest special collection divisions in the library. We've been around since 1897 when we were formed as the Hall of Maps and Charts. We are the most comprehensive public library with maps, and we have about 6 million cartographic items now. So those of you who have known us for a while, that's a little bit of a growth. And we collect in all areas of map making in 190 countries in 170 languages. So we do invite you all to explore our collections online or on site when you have the chance. Today I would like to add my thanks to the Friends of the Library and the Philip Lee Phillips Society members for joining us today and supporting this event. For over a decade, the Phillips Lee Phillips Map Society members have given their maps from their personal collections, added to contributions totaling more than $1.2 million. These gifts help develop, enhance, and promote the collections of the Geography and Map Division, which expands the library's reach and deepens our impact. These and your contributions make events like these happen. So, I would like to thank you again for joining us for mapping in the Islamic tradition. Those of you in person will have access to a special curated collection that was developed with the African and Middle Eastern Division as well as the Geography and Map Division in the adjoining room in LJ 113 when we take our break. And we will also online have a recent acquisitions presentation. And I'm going to introduce the person who's going to be doing all of that and more. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Carissa Pastuch, our reference librarian in the Geography and Map Division, who will introduce our first speaker. Let's hear it for Carissa.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Carissa Pastuch, as Paulette mentioned, reference librarian in the Geography and Map Division, and we're very excited about our program today, Mapping in the Islamic Tradition, and about our speakers. Our first speaker today is Dr. Shah Mahmood Hanifi, Professor of History at James Madison University. Dr. Hanifi teaches courses on the Middle East and South Asia. He received a BA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a PhD from the University of Michigan. Dr. Hanifi's dissertation formed the basis of a Gutenberg E-Prize from the American Historical Association. Hanifi's research and publications have addressed subjects including colonial political economy, the history of printing, the Pashto language, photography, cartography, animal and environmental studies, and Orientalism in Afghanistan. His recent edited book focuses on the early 19th century British Indian scholar administrator Monsieur Elphinstone, and he is now working on a monograph that examines the environmental history of Afghanistan over the longue durée through animals, climates, food, mountains, and rivers. Dr. Hanifi served as the treasurer of the American Institute of Afghanistan Studies from 2003 to 2015 and from 2017 to 2020. He served on the South Asian Council of the Association for Asian Studies and on the Board of Trustees of the American Institute of Indian Studies. He now serves on the editorial boards of Afghanistan and the International Journal of Middle East Studies, and as a special theme editor on Afghanistan for the Oxford Research Encyclopedia of Asian History. In addition to the AHA, Professor Hanifi has received research grants from the Social Science Research Council, the Council of American Overseas Research Centers, the Asian Development Bank, and the Carnegie Corporation of New York. Today, his talk titled Surveying the Surveyors, Modern Maps of Afghanistan and Their Critics will begin with brief consideration of the geographic space of Afghanistan in the context of medieval Islamic and early modern global mapping history. Focusing on the modern era, the body of the presentation focuses Imperial, National, and Military Cartography. The imperial era is considered through British colonial cartography in South Asia, in which context a series of 19th century mapping projects culminated in the bounded space of Afghanistan that remains in place, however tenuously, today. The second part of the paper addresses national mapping projects undertaken by the Afghan state and its international benefactors in the middle decades of the 20th century. The final component of his presentation addresses the militarized mapping of Afghanistan from the 1980s through the 2010s. The presentation will utilize archival and digitized maps from the Library of Congress, maps from other online collections, and items from the author's personal collection. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shah Mahmood Hanifi.
Well, good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here, to meet Carissa for the first time, and to reacquaint myself with a number of other people who make this institution run. And I'd like to mention the bibliographers in the African Middle East Division, Hirad Dinavari, who's been a long-term supporter of Afghanistan in so many ways. Not just me, but legions of students and other colleagues of mine. Hirad's a great resource for Afghanistan studies, and we cherish him. Afghanistan falls between the Middle East and South Asia, and I want to also recognize Jonathan Lohr and Charlotte Giles. If Charlotte is here, I've not met her yet, but thank you for all you do in the Asian division of the library, and to both divisions for making space for Afghanistan in between your concerns. I also want to thank the Geography and Map Division personnel, including Cynthia Smith, who's been a great service to me in the pre-COVID age, when I enjoyed my time working with her and her staff in the Geography and Maps Division. So it's a real honor and pleasure to be here to celebrate really their resource sharing that gives people like us the sort of myth of expertise. They're the experts. We're just along for the ride on their resources. So please allow me just to try to, I should warn you, I have become addicted to PowerPoint. I have way more slides than we will be able to digest. I'm going to try, with Carissa's help, to kind of address one slide in a series of images and move rapidly that way without focusing on every single image. So the organization, as outlined, will kind of address the colonial and imperial era, let's say the 19th century, then the era of Afghanistan's independence and global development in the country, primarily the bulk of the 20th century. And then we'll turn to the last catastrophic, more than a generation, nearly 2 generations, of warfare and humanitarian activity, both of which fields of action are mapped. I do want to note something about Afghanistan and the paradox of its historical position, that is supposedly never fully colonized or subject to the full forces of imperialism, but yet strangely and really often violently subjected to those forces in extreme ways that make it perhaps the epitome of colonization and imperialism in some ways. And so it's extremely important to recognize that maps are a particularly critical way for understanding and knowing Afghanistan. And maps of Afghanistan have informed a lot of policy decisions. They're bound up in a lot of systems of knowledge production. And I'd like to sort of bring those aspects of maps to the fore, sort of putting maps in the context of a larger epistemology of Afghanistan. I do want to say, in my view, maps about Afghanistan, and indeed knowledge about Afghanistan, have done a lot of harm to the Afghan people in ways that we'd have to unpack. But maps are one symbol of imperialism and colonialism, and I do want to note that in its absorption of colonial and imperial influences, Afghan elites have been sort of co-producers of those activities. And in my view, Afghan elites need to do a little more with the map that's kind of been used against them by outsiders who sort of get access through the map and contain Afghans with the map. So, of course, broadly, Afghanistan is notable for being perhaps the most orientalized location out there. There's a lot of misrepresentations that Afghanistan is subjected to, and we want to see some of that in our maps too. So this map is a map from the 1970s. The first map is a map in a schoolroom in the north of Afghanistan, the previous map. And you can see it has a German flag on it. And this is an indication of how accessible Afghanistan has been to the outside world. Where in the 70s, the Germans got their flag on an Afghan map in an elementary school. So, yeah, of course, I am here in a shared setting with Karen Pinto, we can go to the next map, please, who's a real expert in the Islamic mapping tradition. If that's, Dr. Pinto, it's a pleasure to see you, and I've benefited from your work extraordinarily. I have no business talking about El-Biruni, except that I visited Ghazna and his grave this summer. And those pictures are of the tomb on the left. You can see very small. This is the 10th century, Ghazna, Afghanistan, eastern Afghanistan, where activity related to Islamic mapping took a new turn. El-Biruni, basically, if I could summarize the details that Dr. Pinto can address, put a sort of flat, round, connected oceans vision of the world on the table for future mappers. And that happened in Afghanistan, today's Afghanistan. And there was so much going on there, the birth of modern Persian. And it's just, the pillar is perhaps the best known monument of Ghazna and that era. And Mahmud of Ghaznavi's grave is less known, but at least it's adorned in a structure. El-Biruni's grave, to be in that condition, is an example of Afghan elites not taking their heritage, mapping heritage, seriously enough. And it's a long road, but I'm trying to work with UNESCO to do something about that lack of celebration of perhaps the most famous person buried in Afghanistan. So, please. This would be the Islamic mapping tradition that that activity is situated within. Dr. Pinto, again's book, will help us more than I can say. This is an image of my first book cover where I was trying to deal with colonial political economy, particularly market relations within Afghanistan and across the border. So I looked at trade relations, and I essentially counted caravan taxes. I spent a lot of time looking at trade, but I never thought about the camel until later in my career. And it was on the back of the camel that I rode into environmental history. And if we can, these maps are from just a couple, there's 4 maps in a row, one large and then one small. These are from my first book, which was Born Digitally, where I looked at the evolution of the category Afghanistan out of the category the Kingdom of Kabul. And the maps that are here are from the David Rumsey map collection that is available online for free, and it's an incredible resource for everyone all the time, throughout time. And my first book incorporated 10 maps from, I think, 1724 to 1850 or something, where Afghanistan sort of emerges out of Kabul and then captures Kabul, so to speak. We can go to the next sort of set. The next book is, I don't know which one is out there. I think the Connecting Histories book might be out there. This is an edited volume where I looked at the colonial official, the first diplomatic ambassador to Afghanistan, in that sense, the author of the first book on Afghanistan, in that sense, the person who set the framework for knowing and understanding Afghanistan, Mount Stuart Elphinstone, who's much more well known for his kind of British Indian service. He's not well known enough for what he did in the field of Afghanistan studies. And so I look at his maps. I look at the map that Elphinstone generated about the Kingdom of Kabul, note, not Afghanistan, and how it is in kind of a dialogic relation with other maps. Most importantly, the map produced by the official mapper of the embassy, the official surveyor, has a very different map result than Elphinstone's published map result. Same data, different maps. Same data, different categories of analysis. The archival data is mapping countries west of the Indus. Elphinstone's targeting the Kingdom of Kabul. And they're all framed by larger mapping traditions within British India, of which a great article in the Washington Map Society journal Portolan has an article by Emily Boak that deals with the sort of very nicely, accessibly, the place of Afghanistan in the Great Trigonometric Survey of India. And we can just kind of go through, and this is Rennell. The master mapper in all of this who produces the maps is John Arrowsmith in England. That's Elphinstone's map. And that's the archival map. Elphinstone's map folds out of a book, the archival map goes on a table. And the question I'm asking about maps is who produces them, for what purpose, and how are they used or misused? How do the people mapped feel the map? And this is an exploration in colonial discrepancies between data and sort of presentation or analysis. And again, these multiple images are little pieces of the map logos and legends. The point culminating, this is a map of the Indus River, and I really see now the environment. That is the Indus River, the Hindu Kush Mountains, and the Amu Darya or Oxus River being historic Afghanistan. And the British were first interested in Afghanistan through the Indus River as a sort of artery in a global network of trade. Indeed, the Indus River is the namesake of the first army that invaded Afghanistan, the Army of the Indus, that was famously decimated. And the idea is not to capture Kabul, but capture the trade of the Indus for the empire. And there's just a tremendous amount of cartographic and scientific data about the Indus that's extremely relevant. There's maps of the route of the Indus army, the maps of the Army of the Indus route in the archives in the British Library. There are French maps of this space also in the British Library. And again, scattered across their map division and in their Asian and African Studies division. The Second War, so the first result was a disaster for the British, and it was a hands-off policy for 30, 40 years until the next war. The first war is 1839 to 42. The second war is from 1878 to 1880. And that war did not end disastrously, but unsuccessfully for the British. And they appointed a kind of sort of client elite to receive a subsidy and organize things in a way that the British controlled. He executed, and this is the beginning of the real territorial sort of containment, the impoverishment, the state-society violence. that Afghanistan came to be known with subsequently. And the British Army was obsessed with mapping the mountains of the Hindu Kush leading up to the Second War, because it was all about access to and through. Both of these wars are about access of other empires to South Asia through Afghanistan. The first war was about French phobia, and the second one's Russian concerns. But it's the mapping of the mountains. There's a series of maps now of the Hindu Kush mountains that, again, an extensive maps exist in a narrative context in relation to other visuals. There's a book culture, a kind of bureaucratic culture, aesthetic concerns. They're composite intellectual and cultural artifacts. And we can get very detailed altitude maps of the Hindu Kush between Kabul and the Oxus, which is, again, the concern. Sort of Kabul's under control. What's the Oxus River going to do for imperial boundary concerns? And that's what happens after the Second War. Afghanistan finally does take its modern bounded cartographic shape. And I believe we kind of, let's continue. More mapping. Right here, can we go back to that slide, please? This is a map from a book by a scholar in Pakistan, Azmat Hayat Khan, who it's too small to see, but usefully details the progressive bounding and bordering of Afghanistan. A series of bordering projects with different actors involved over different times from the late 1960s to 1993. When the final border between Afghanistan and British India, the so-called Durand Line, was formalized. And that's the agreement. The implementation of the boundary is quite another matter. But like all boundaries, the Afghan leader gets a huge subsidy for it, and now a set of regulated relations between the subsidy giver and the empire as a whole. And it's just, the point is Afghanistan has not been there for 5,000 years. It's a fully modern construction in that sense. The map of Afghanistan can train movement through Afghanistan, which is the historic space between the Indus Oxus through the Hindu Kush. The British did a lot of other mapping besides border mapping. This is linguistic mapping of the region of our concern. More linguistic mapping. The British did a lot of tribal mapping and mapping of tribal groups, of Afghans and Pathans. And let me just take a moment and say, one of the things that haunts the field of Afghanistan studies is the metonymy between the category, term, Afghan, Pashtun, and Pathan. The literature on each of these three groups sort of casually assumes that whatever the author is saying applies to all the other groups. And this has been enormously misleading for students and scholars alike, for so many different reasons. The point is the word Pathan refers to Pashto-speaking tribes. Pathan, a term from sort of the long-term presence of Afghans and Pashto speakers migrating to India. It's kind of a Hindustani term. The British picked it up, institutionalized it, appears on their map. And the sort of beginning of that problem of metonymy is with Elphinstone. Elphinstone set the understanding through his map and narrative, 700-page book around the map, that somehow this sort of political system of the Afghans is centered on Kabul, and the people who are running that show sort of position Pashto and Pashtunness as the cultural ancient origin of the people. And those are just wildly problematic claims. The history of Afghan elites involves the presence of Persian. Pashto has been minoritized, diminutivized historically, until the recent era when things, of course, linguistically and politically have changed. But the national map of Afghanistan emerges after the Third Anglo-Afghan War of 1919, which is such a interesting thing. Afghanistan gets its independence, which is celebrated among the Afghan diaspora. Leaving open the question is what was before independence? And the question is colonial dependence. And what independence did for Afghanistan was open the doors for more forms of dependency to a larger number of external actors, international actors. So beginning in 1919, the cartographic door is open to the space. This map is from the 50s or 60s. It's an Afghan government production. There is an Afghan kind of cartographic institute, and I wasn't able to engage that, but I will. This map in Persian, the national map of Afghanistan, is interesting for what you can see in very small print to the right, which are sort of English language things. And the point is, the basis of this map is United States mapping in Afghanistan in the 1950s. And it's the Fairchild Aerial Survey Corporation that did that mapping, whose data enters that map. And the Fairchild Mapping Corporation has a deep lineage into sort of World War II bombing radar stuff. So there's a coercive dimension to these maps. And I do want to emphasize that the map has been a tool of power and violence wreaked upon the Afghan people because of the map. And what I see in the independent era of Afghanistan are further sort of absorptions of external colonial imperial influences, languages, technologies, opportunities abroad. And what the framing I come to conclude works is crypto-colonialism. Afghanistan is a test case for a crypto colony, which is a concept we can address later. And again, this begins the opening of the mapping. The French are the first in 1922. The French archaeological mission has a very significant influence on the mapping and cultural heritage preservation and documentation in Afghanistan till today. Still today, from 1922 to today, the French have been the most consistent actors on the mapping impulse upon Afghanistan. And that's 1922. And there's a whole series of French archaeological, the DAFA is the acronym, and I won't say Délégation Archéologique d'Afghanistan. This is the first, I'm able to see, the first map in any official Afghan government publication of Afghanistan. And it happens in 1932. And it happens in the context of an annual magazine, kind of a special edition. Again, 700-800 pages called the Salnama. We have the Salnamas in this institution available for you. 1932-33 should have this. It's the only color page except the king's photo in the book. And the writing at the bottom says basically, this map was prepared hastily. Be careful with it. It reflects some provincial boundaries, but it does not reflect the international boundaries of Afghanistan. So we got to read the language on the map. Again, maps of telephones appear in this volume of Afghan government publication. Telephone lines, roads, and mines and mining are the next series of maps that sort of the first maps I can see appearing of Afghanistan by Afghans, so to speak. This is the German kind of mapping project, the 1930s. The Germans, as you know, in the 1930s, had an Aryan race theory that went to an extreme, violent, genocidal direction. And Aryans are found all over the world. The colonial understanding of Pashto and Afghans is that they have some sort of Aryanness to them through the Indo-European language. And this category is very complex because the Afghans have absorbed it too. The national airline, Ariana, same word. So the Germans went to Afghanistan in 1935 under the National Socialist regime to look for the original botanical and vegetables that the original Aryans ate, because the original Aryans, they understood through historic linguistics to come from and through this area. So the Germans did a lot of mapping of the Hindu Kush, in Nuristan in particular. And that's that series of maps in the Deutsche Hindu Kush Expedition, 1935. The next map is now the Americans. National Geographic Society. I have the volume. In 1933, National Geographic Society is such an important interface between government knowledge production and public knowledge dissemination. The National Geographic Society has had a very important influence on Afghanistan. The magazine has had an important influence on Afghanistan. The picture of the Afghan girl in the 70s or 80s set sort of a reference point for policy towards the Soviet Union, very critical. National Geographic magazine. That new map of Asia is celebrated in the image. This is the map of Afghanistan that appears in a long, very richly photographed essay titled "Afghanistan Makes Haste Slowly." And how interesting. And the map, I must read the little details there, but it's just full of the Orientalist rhetoric. Afghanistan behind the veil of the Hindu Kush now being sort of whatever. I mean, it's just all the same, sort of Orientalist dribble about the lack of history of this space that's been most in history almost of any place in the world in terms of consistent documentation of global history. So we can go. In 1943, the US Army, again, the context here is World War II, and the US Army produced a terrain map of Afghanistan that became declassified at some point, and it's full of all kinds of information that gets portrayed through maps, and there's a narrative, the sort of military box approach to knowledge, the acronyms, the use of photographs here in this publication are quite revealing. And the point I'd like to make is that there is a map. I pay attention to the term terrain, which is going to come back to us. And let's continue, please. The Americans get much more deeply involved in Afghanistan after World War II through the development of the Helmand Valley agricultural zone, through dams, canals, sort of hydroelectricity, and the building of sort of an infrastructure of development, the building of dams and the mapping of the dams, the building of bridges, roads, airports, a sort of little America city with 4-H clubs and movie night and that kind of ice cream socials. And this is from the Morrison Knudsen Company was the dominant corporate interface between US government policy and Afghanistan. And I want to mention again, it's Afghan elites during this period that are making the arrangements with these corporations. And the point here is that looks like Dulles Airport. Why? Because it's the same architect who designed Dulles. There's Dulles Airport in Kandahar. This is from here, archival map of the Helmand Valley project, the sort of, again, grid. Now, the opening of Afghanistan had a lot to do with the sort of modernization theory, development theory, and the sort of growth of global capitalism through the rubric of tourism and the hippie trail kind of access to Afghanistan and the sort of Cold War strange paradox, again, with great competition between the Soviets and the Americans. Soviets damming, road building, bridge building in the north, Americans in the south and east primarily. Open to the world, all international, Germans, French, Japanese, Australians, and tourists. The next thing, if I'm sorry, this is kind of an important map of Kabul. And what's a problem here is that most people understand Afghanistan through Kabul. And that's a huge problem for how we understand the space and the country and the people. Kabul's exceptional, not typical for the place. And the author of this very influential tourist guidebook to Afghanistan, if we can continue, this appears in this book, it's Nancy Hatch Dupree. Can you please stay there? Nancy Dupree has, I think, participated in events in this building. Hirad may be able to correct me. Nancy Dupree is a known influential actor to government officials, intellectuals, students around the world for Afghanistan. She's a primary voice. She's been positioned as the grandmother of Afghanistan. And I'd like to reject that wholly. Afghans don't need Louis Dupree and Nancy Dupree to be their grandparents. I suggest that's part of the problem. So in approaching everything about maps critically, we must look critically about where they appear, the context, who's created the context for this. And we do need to get back to the Duprees and how central they are to the understanding of Afghanistan that endures. These are important voices. They've left an important cartographic footprint, and we need to retread that. If we can please, the French are still also tourists and monuments for the French public. This map is a map of Pashtunistan. Pashtunistan was the issue during the Cold War that kept both the Soviets and Americans heavily interested in this problem. Pashtunistan was a proposed, upon partition of British India and the creation of Pakistan and India, which was a genocidally violent partition of many partitions in South Asia. At the moment of decolonization, there was a sort of plebiscite, electorates. Again, Muslim League, the Indian National Congress, and some other regional parties in the Northwest Frontier region. Again, and the point, if we could stay there, please, that the Afghan government was concerned as sort of a neighbor and a client, to some extent, of empire. What's going to happen? This thing called Pakistan, and so basically the Afghans proposed that the people in the space, the Pashto speakers, should be able to vote for joining Afghanistan. Or having their own, it was actually to have their own space called Pashtunistan. And so this sort of issue between Afghanistan and Pakistan, the global superpowers, the local commerce people who suffered from blockades and sort of through the 50s and 60s, huge flare-ups. Great, nuclear threat. I mean, this is serious, serious international stuff around the issue of Pashtunistan, which is about the bad colonial mapping dividing a tribal or ethnic group. And that sort of move from a colonial tribal group to a modern ethnic group is really consequential for the mapping of the people so designated and so mapped. We can continue. The ethnic map of Afghanistan, I'll conclude, I think, in 8 minutes. I have a watch I'm watching. I don't know the timekeeper. Is that it? So thank you very much. I'd like to argue that the most damaging, most violent, most problematic map of Afghanistan is the ethnic map of Afghanistan. That seems to be the first visual people get when they Google Afghanistan, the ethnic map. The manipulation of that map, who produced it and how it's implemented in terms of majority, that's all about majority and minority populations. It's a colonial idea. They did it in British India with Hindus and Muslims, and look what happened. This ethnic map of Afghanistan has the same volatile effect. We need to get beyond the ethnic map of Afghanistan. To do that, we need to understand where it came from. And it came from Louis Dupree. And Louis Dupree worked on the ethnic map for his decades of being stationed in Afghanistan. And we can just see incarnations of the ethnic mapping project from 1961 to 1966, I think. 1971 is next, and then 1976. You can go to the next one, please. That's the concluding map that appeared in Louis Dupree's book. Louis Dupree wrote a book called Afghanistan that I've heard referenced as the Bible for Afghanistan by American diplomats. This book is very similar to Mount Stuart Elphinstone's book. This book inherits and uses the same kinds of conceptual frameworks that Elphinstone used. There's an epistemology, a shared epistemology from Elphinstone to Dupree and their maps. And this is the map that appeared in the book, and as such, it's really consequential. And here's the book, I think, next. And the problem here is this book gets reprinted. This is the 1980 edition, where the Soviets have invaded. And the issue, the problem as I see it, in terms of academic knowledge production, is the straddling between public academia and intelligence service that Louis Dupree performed. And that relationship between public knowledge and intelligence, sort of actionable knowledge, actionable in the kill chain kind of knowledge, is a critical issue that people who study Afghanistan need to wrestle with. How compromised the field of Afghanistan studies is by intelligence services and intelligence priorities, intelligence emphasis, intelligence cloistering of data. We can go, this is Louis Dupree with the Mujahideen. If you can go to the next page, this is the incarnations of the ethnic map in the Soviet invasion time. This is Louis Dupree with the Mujahideen. Louis Dupree's version of understanding of ethnicity became enacted, I will hypothesize, in the policy making towards the 7 Mujahideen parties, privileging minority and minority groups. And the informant on Dupree's left arm was killed because of his providing intelligence information to the CIA by the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, for whatever that's worth. This is a map that's displayed. It's a map of, again, a CIA map from the 1990s about movement and migration and this thing called Pashtun tribes, understanding Pashtun tribes. The ethnic mapping is the only way to understand Afghanistan, even in the 1980s and 90s. And on and on. The ethnic map, this is the Atlas of the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. It's an atlas that has an ethnic map to it, produced in Poland. This is the Mujahideen map from Louis Dupree's papers at Duke. This is sort of part of the marketing of the Mujahideen, the use of the map to sort of sell the Mujahideen to the American public, and indeed many other international actors. And this sort of Mujahideenization of Afghanistan has a history, and we know the actors involved, and we know the result in the form of the Taliban as the grandchildren of them. So we've got some policy problems and ways to understand them and unpack them and surmount them. And in the last couple of minutes, the ethnic mapping, that's the most recent ethnic map from the current National Atlas of Afghanistan produced in Germany. The DRAs were produced in Poland. The outsourcing of map production. The organization, I must be brief, the Afghanistan Information Management Service was the clearinghouse for information during the 1980s and 90s for international actors and sort of the trans-border concerns of the Afghanistan Information Management system based in Pakistan through the 80s and 90s, becomes the clearinghouse for all cartographic information, and in 2001, back to Kabul. So there's a real interesting history of mapping humanitarian activity and a lot of development activity, along with war-related mapping and humanitarian mapping. And we can go kind of quickly through population, density, food supply, climate issues. This is humanitarian U.S. aid mapping after 9/11, mainly between 2008 and 12 are these maps. Huge concerns with water and drought. Huge concerns with watershed, groundwaters, and sort of hydration. And climate change. The water of Afghanistan. The waters of Afghanistan. Go ahead. This is a map of the provincial reconstruction teams that represented the international military occupation of Afghanistan for the 20 years that they lasted. And this indicates that there was a global war happening on top of the humanitarian and development activity. And there's kind of competing maps. This is another provincial reconstruction team map. Maps of Afghanistan for international occupiers. And again, I want to just take note. For 20 years, Afghanistan suffered the wrath of imperial bombing. From Tora Bora, 2001, blowing off the tips of mountains to find bin Laden in caves that were built by him, and the sort of use of high-powered bunker buster weapons. The use of depleted uranium in United States munitions is a huge problem for us as citizens of this place that uses those weapons in ways that leave a long-term deleterious effect on populations subjected to depleted uranium. In Afghanistan, there are birth defects among humans and animals in the East, especially because of the bombing that used depleted uranium. Depleted uranium began to be used in United States munitions in the sort of Bosnian War, amplified in the Gulf War, first Gulf War in Iraq. Afghanistan and Iraq share a sort of United States-sponsored radiation of the groundwaters. And this is a problem for the long-term habitability of the space that we've been mapping and the people that live there. Maybe I'll conclude and we can carry on. I've said enough. I'd like to hear from you, and I'd like to thank you for being here, okay? Oh, okay, sure, I'm sorry to leave a mess here.
What a wonderful talk. Thank you so much for that incredible showing of our resources and how you've challenged our perceptions and thinking about all kinds of things related to Afghanistan as mapping. I thank you very much as a Geography and Map Division employee, and I'm sure everybody else feels that way too. So now we will have a brief Q&A. Please wait for microphones. There are a couple of microphones that are going to be roving around the room shortly, and because of our hybrid format, it's very important that you wait until a microphone gets to you to start asking your question so that our friends who are joining us online can hear you as well. And I will wrap this up too with my shepherd's crook as usual. But first, another round of applause while we're waiting for those microphones to go out. First presentation.
We have two questions that I'd like to, right back here, in the back, very back.
Oh, hello.
We have two questions from Zoom. The first is more of a deep appreciation for your work. As an Afghan and a librarian, this listener has struggled with all of these very issues in his or her attempts to study the area and is glad to find your work now many years later. The second is, how do these different languages show up on the maps if place names have different names in different languages?
It's a fantastic question about toponymy and the labels that we use to understand spaces and peoples. And I think the only way to surmount that problem is to recognize terminological variance as a fact of life. I can call this a computer or my Mac, that kind of thing. And again, it's not me, it's that different people use different categories of spatial reckoning at different times as well. And I think these are, the only way to surmount the problem is to be clear about what you mean when you invoke a category or a term. And it becomes very specific, I'm sure, to certain eras and certain maps, and it's quite complex, where one region does assume a different nomenclature through time. How Afghanistan became it out of Haryana, Bactria, Gandhara, the Peloponnesus, or whatever the category may be. I thank you for the question. Sorry I can't give you a clear answer.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, what a rich trove of maps. And I'm also a Michigan PhD, so go blue.
Without
Who
question.
teaches at a Virginia institution, actually, Virginia Tech. So,
Happy to meet you.
so I really like I think you're absolutely right, obviously, about the problem of ethnic mapping, and that's of course a very, very common strategy of, dividing and ruling. One of the area I work on is Southeast Asia, where definitely European colonizers could colonize because they could take advantage of internal rivalries. And I was wondering whether sort of like, if that kind of situation is also part of, the impetus for ethnic mapping. I mean, this is not to excuse colonizers, obviously, but I'm sort of wondering whether, that seems to be a situation where Europeans could take advantage of. And then my sort of other question is about Elphinstone, whether, so my other interest is Alexander the Great, and obviously he's one of the, failed conquerors of Afghanistan, right? And whether his kind of, whether people still, look back to sort of the classical history to sort of rework them into new histories, and including Elphinstone in particular. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for two really rich questions. If I understand the gist of the first part, the thrust is how that international actors manipulate the landscape as they...
Yes, so the social landscape.
Sure. Sure.
Sorry, the social landscape.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you have thoughts about that,
Yeah.
like what that interaction between the social landscape that they encounter and then the taking advantage of rifts and ruptures in that landscape.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. And if I could begin a response with the question of language, and that is question of interpreters and informants on the one hand, and then the question of the multilingual space that Afghanistan is on the other hand, where there's a great deal of multilinguality, and very common bilingualism. And again, that word bilingualism is misleading because it's not even, where, for example, speakers of Pashto and speakers of Persian have equal kind of bilingualness or perceptions and need to be bilingual. It's Pashto speakers that need to be bilingual in Persian to function in the administrative scholarly context and things. So with that in mind, I think the relationship between the informants or collaborators or mediators of imperial projects and the social landscape in Afghanistan is mediated linguistically. And so the kind of hegemony to some extent of Persian, in this space becomes extremely relevant, and who is sort of able to, and the British, for example, Elphinstone's generation of British colonial officials are known as Persianists because they studied Persian and used Persian as a route to understand the history of India through the Mughal Empire and Islam, and as a vehicle for communication in places like Afghanistan. So that would, and it would be this sort of positioning of a given language in imperial versus exploratory context or whatever. That might be a route to answering some of the questions there. With Alexander, and the sort of returning to his era, yeah, I think that's a very common move of imperial actors to see themselves stepping in the shadow or footsteps of a previous world conquerors. The British in particular were obsessed, and maps of Alexander Burns, who's just a critical actor, again, intelligence versus public information issues there for him. He and often sort of stated, Alexander was here as he's narrating his passage through his voyage into Bukhara, for example. So, yeah, really rich questions. Thank you. Obviously, they come from Ann Arbor, so that's been great. Yeah.
Thank you for an amazing presentation. I am not a cartographer or a student of maps, but I am from Ethiopia. And over the years, it has struck me the similarity in history, in geography, and indeed what looks like to be the fate of our two countries, in the sense of being very mountainous, being the source of great waters, having never been colonized, but having fallen to this sort of ethnic division that has left Ethiopia definitely on the road to tatters.
Yeah.
And so your talk was so very meaningful to me, and I just wanted to thank you very much for it. And the history of the whole mapping mission and the ways in which our maps have changed and the legends to the maps, going from early sort of religious, almost mythical connotations to the more modern, ill-defined, linguistic denominations of people that have made it impossible for Ethiopians to coexist. So I just really wanted to thank you for your scholarship and do feel that it has great application far beyond Afghanistan. Thank you.
That's just, I think, such lovely comment. And what resonates with me is kind of in scholarly terms how isolated Afghanistan has been from regional studies tradition, or really from comparative inquiry. And the benefits from positioning a space called Afghanistan with one such as Ethiopia or Vietnam just has so much scholarly potential and just so much potential for increasing everyone's understanding of Afghanistan as not an exceptional place, but actually maybe the sort of epitome of us all in some way, you know, the human predicament, I guess, you know, not to be trapped by the map. But thank you very much for the comparative impetus behind your question.
My name is Patrick Ramirez, and I was curious as to where the field of Islamic cartography in Afghanistan is going to be going now that we're at a bit of a crossroads between military defeat by the US in the region, historiographical creativity in undermining the concept of a nation state as an a priori function of history, and also the willingness of historians to move beyond the concept of a nation state in light of the fact of its failure in a post-colonial context. So with all these factors in mind, where is the field of cartography in regards to Afghanistan going, and in what ways will it be different both on the imperial frontier and the indigenous frontier?
Thank you very much for that question, Patrick. Patrick is my student. Don't you have an exam tomorrow, Patrick? So, I enjoy seeing you wherever it is, Patrick. I enjoy dialoguing with you whatever semester it is, okay? And I hope it continues throughout mapping time, okay? And I think you're really rich and very well-informed question. I guess prompts a really generic response from me. That is that there's no guarantee that anything's going to stay on the map. No guarantee Ethiopia is going to stay there. No guarantee the United States will stay there. Let's be clear. Let's be clear. Nothing has stayed on the map forever, so to speak, historically. Categories change was maybe our first question. And Afghanistan's mapping future is unknown. Let me just say that I think the map of Afghanistan has done so much damage, it's now very fragile, and people are starting to act in ways that will substantively disrupt it. If I could just give one example of a movement within the Afghan populace, that is both domestically and in diaspora, to start thinking about the term Khorasan and Khorasani. We have no guarantee what category will emerge in the future, what it will be based upon, historically or culturally. The point I would like to conclude with, Patrick, is that most Afghan people might not be able to recognize the map of Afghanistan if they saw it. There's all kinds of literacy questions here that affect visual literacy and geographic literacy. And I don't know what effect the map has had for the ordinary bulk of the populace of Afghanistan, but I know the elites that have been in Kabul have been heavily invested in its construction and survival. And so I think the future of the map of Afghanistan rests between how the state officials and elites deal with the ordinary people, or nomads and agriculturalists and laborers that are the bulk of the Afghan population. And I think we'll have to carry that conversation on, Patrick, okay?
And speaking of carrying conversations on, we're going to now turn over to some questions that have come in through Zoom so that our online questions get a chance to get answered as well.
Yeah, so the first one is, how much analysis of maps of Afghanistan issued by the USSR have you undertaken?
Ooh, thank you so much for emphasizing. I had mentioned Russia as part of a imperial mapping variable, the great game, so to speak, in the 19th century between imperial Russia and Britain. And of course, that becomes the Soviet Union in a substantive sense. Now, what is downstairs, Cynthia may remember, were the Soviet aeronautical maps. And I want to say that it took, if those of you who work in a map division or whatever, or know how maps come in carts, I remember that cart being so stacked full, like just reams and reams of Soviet aeronautical mapping of Afghanistan. And I know the Soviets also adopted an attitude towards ethnicity and the concept of nations and what was going on with Soviet kind of politics and identity in Central Asia. All of that did come to bear on Soviet cartography in and of Afghanistan, and I'm not familiar with it in any way, but it's a rich and important area. Thank you for the question.
We have another question from Zoom. Are you familiar with the May 1998 set of 4 maps designed for use of the U.S. Air Force, and they are labeled ONC G7, G6, H7, and H8?
If you can ask the Zoom questioner, are those available at the Perry Castaneda online Texas map library? Because I've seen American military maps of Afghanistan, and I've seen them through the Perry Castaneda online map repository at Texas.
He'll answer eventually on that, but I have another one.
Yeah. Please send them to me. Whoever asked that question, if you have them and would like to share them under obvious privacy things, please find my email, send them to me. I'm an avid consumer of whatever you got. Sure.
The same person mentions that he has a letter from General Mount Elphinstone, hopefully that's pronounced right, when he learned of his posting to Kabul when he was stationed in Meerut, India, to his daughter in England. Do you know of any other letters by him?
Reams and reams at the British Library, where students and scholars can spend a lifetime almost with his material, mainly because it's so rich on the India side. Yeah. Thank you, questioner.
And I'm taking over this stage another time because we are going to finish the question and answer period with that. So please, one more round of applause for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much.